Hi and welcome to a British Audiophile. If you don't know me already, my name is Taran. Compact all-in-one box solutions are becoming increasingly more popular. You know the type I mean, the kind with a built-in streamer, a DAC, maybe even a phono stage for turntable users, and usually Class D amplification so they can keep the footprint down to a minimum. Now, traditional audiophiles will be rolling their eyes at this point, and I get where they're coming from. If you want the last word in performance, you're usually better off with separate boxes. But I, for one, am glad that these type of components exist. I'll just share with you a little anecdote. For most of my life, I lived in London before a few years ago moving up here to the countryside. And for 12 of those years, I lived in a house where my hi-fi system was relegated to the bedroom. Real estate in London is at a premium. As much as I love my exposure pre and mono blocks, they just took up too much space in our main living area. As a result, it really got listened to, and I'm sure if I had a compact solution, I'd have spent a lot more time enjoying listening to music. So you're pretty well served if you're looking at these kind of solutions for around £500. There's stuff from NAD, Denon, Marantz and Yamaha, and there's a couple of really good solutions around £2,000, the NAD M10 that I reviewed, and also the Naim Uniti Atom. But what if you're looking to spend somewhere in between? Well, that's what I'm considering here today. The Cyrus One Cast retails for £1,299. Let's see what it's about. The Cyrus One Cast is what I would describe as a half-width unit, measuring 220mm wide, 85mm high, and 390mm deep. It weighs in at 5.6 kilograms. Or if you prefer, 8.7 times 3.3 times 15.3 inches and 12.3 pounds. The front acrylic display hides the on-off button. It has dials for input selection and volume control and a headphone socket. Basic functionality is accessible through the supplied remote control. A minor niggle, the LEDs to indicate volume level and input can be obscured if you aren't looking at the One Cast on axes. You're well served with digital connections with the ubiquitous optical and coaxial inputs. It's nice to see an asynchronous USB which will support PCM up to 32 bits and 192 kHz resolution and DSD x 128. The HDMI ARC input is useful as it allows you to connect to a TV and use the TV's remote control to control the volume. Analog connections are limited, but there is a phono connection to use with turntables that have moving magnet cartridges. There's only one line level RCA connection, but it can be switched to fixed output to integrate with a home cinema receiver, so that you can effectively use the One Cast as a power amp. The pre-out allows you to connect external power amps to the One Cast, or if you prefer, active subwoofers. Let's take a look inside, and the first thing you'll notice is that large toroidal transformer, and that's because this unit has a linear power supply, unlike many Class D amplifiers that have switch mode power supplies. Now there's a label with connections, but I can't see any VA rating, so I don't know what it's rated at, but it's quite big for a little compact amplifier like this. That's the AC inlet filter, and over this side is what I presume the preamp, dominated by that chip which is an ARM processor that takes over control. And I think it's the preamp because it's connected by this ribbon cable to this front PCB board which handles the functionality on the front of the unit. Over this side you have the power amplifier, which you can't really see because of that board mounted on top, but it's Cyrus's own hybrid Class D design. It puts out an impressive 100 watts per channel. That's both channels driven to 0.1% distortion. It's quite impressive for a little unit like this. And if I can zoom in, there's 6 of these power supply filter caps. They're rated at 33,000 microfarads a piece. So there's 3 of them per channel. That's just under 10,000 microfarads per channel. Nothing particularly impressive about that. Underneath here, you can't quite see them, but there are the output transistors. And this board mounted on top, the blue one, is the DAC board. There's a processor which I can't quite see what it says, but I should imagine that's probably to take care of the asynchronous USB input. And there is an ESS DAC chip. It's the 9018K2M, which is the low powered version, and that chip's been around for quite a while. It's getting a little long in the tooth now, but it's a well regarded chip when it first came out. Mounted on top of that green board is the streaming module and the Bluetooth connectivity, and that's why it's so heavily shielded. So that's essentially what we have here. The Cyrus One Cast has a presentation that veers on the slightly dry and analytical side of neutral. It'll appeal to those people who like to scrutinize the details within a recording, but it does lack a little bit of dynamic vigor. Allow me to elaborate. The bass is fast, tight, and it has reasonable extension. Now this is a classic trait of good Class D amplification, and it means that the One Cast is really good at keeping up with fast percussive transients. But it does lack a little bit of mid-bass punch in that 50 to 100 Hertz area where a kick drum, a snare drum, or a tom is going to hit. And I wish it just let its hair down a little bit more and go for it. What that translates to is that it's not the last word in scale and dynamics. The Hagel H95 hits harder and it has a wider soundstage. Now neither of these amplifiers have particularly great soundstage depth. That's something that you'd expect around this price. It's when you step up to something like the NAD M10 that you get a lot more layering front to back. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the mid-range is neutral, but I consider the Hagel H95 to have a neutral mid-range, and the One Cast is definitely a touch leaner. Now it's not as lean as the NAD M10, and these are characteristics that are attributed to some Class D amplifiers. Those of you who are regular viewers of this channel will know that one of the tests I have for determining the naturalness and neutrality in the mid-range is to play saxophones, trumpets and pianos. And the One Cast fared very well with pianos and saxophones, but the trumpet did sound a little thin, and that wasn't something that I picked up with the Hagel. There's nothing bright, harsh or aggressive about this amplifier, but it isn't warm sounding either. That touch of leanness in the bass and lower mid-range isn't going to emasculate my favourite male vocalists, people like Johnny Cash, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, but it does make them sound a little less butch. Female vocalists fare very well. You can play your audiophile classics to your heart's delight. People like Nora Jones, Patricia Barber, Jennifer Warnes, all captured beautifully. And it's because the upper mid-range is very refined, as are the highs. Sibilance is extremely well controlled, and as long as your system is capable of revealing it and it's there in the recording, there's a lovely airiness to the top end as well. In terms of retaining the information that's there in the recording, the One Cast does a pretty good job. It has a presentation that draws your attention to the mid-range and higher frequencies, and that's where most of the detail is in any case. In absolute terms, it's a little bit behind the Hagel H95 in terms of the amount of information it pulls off the recording. The instrument separation on the Hagel is a little bit better. Now that's listening through the internal DAC on the One Cast. When I connected my Chord Mojo to the RCA input of the One Cast, that disparity was pretty much gone. But I think most people will be looking to keep the box count to a minimum with this kind of solution, so they'll probably be using the internal DAC that does a pretty good job. Compared to the NAD M10, you realize what you get for your extra money. It's like a veil has been lifted, even in comparison to the Hagel H95, certainly in comparison to the One Cast. To take advantage of streaming capability, you can cast to the device. You need to download the Google Home app, follow the very straightforward on-screen instructions, and then it'll pretty much support any streaming service out there that you can cast directly. Alternatively, if you've got an Apple device, you can stream to it directly via AirPlay 2. It'll even stream directly via Amazon Music. The benefit of these formats over Bluetooth is that they're lossless, and the One Cast takes over streaming duties as opposed to your phone or tablet handling them, and that provides sonic benefits. You can voice control the One Cast as long as you have a suitable smart speaker such as the Amazon Echo, Apple HomePod or Google Home. It can't access Alexa, Siri and Google Assistant directly. The One Cast has more than enough power on tap to drive most of the speakers that you're likely to partner with it in a small or medium-sized room. Now, it's not going to compete with 300-watt power amps, so as long as you're reasonably sensible about what you partner with it, I don't think you're going to run into any difficulties. I tried it with 3 of my favourite speakers at different price points. First up was the PSB Imagine Mini at £600. And they have a slightly cool and analytical nature, as does the One Cast. You think the combination of the two together would be too much of a good thing, but it wasn't at all. The One Cast just played to the strengths of the PSBs. There's a very detailed, very precise kind of presentation. Okay, it wasn't the last word in terms of warmth, but that isn't something that you'd expect from these two combined together in any case. They're made for a really good compact small room solution, perhaps in a study, a bedroom or a small living space. And as I got closer to the speakers, things got even better, partly because they play really well together at low volumes, but the downside of a compact little solution like this is scale and dynamics, and the perception of scale and dynamics improves as you get closer to the speakers, so they really sounded very good together in the near field. Next up was the Amphion Argon 1s. That's a speaker that retails for £1,200, £1,300 in this finish. It has a similar tonal balance to the PSB Imagine Minis, slightly on the cool analytical side of neutral, but it's a bigger speaker with much greater dynamics and much more bass weight and extension, and a more open mid-range. That's what I expected to hear, and that's exactly what I heard. The combination worked again really nicely together. Okay, didn't reach quite the heights of the Hagel H95 with the Amphion Argon 1s. That was a bigger presentation still with more tonal richness, but the One Cast wasn't that far behind. Last up, you've guessed it, my long-term reference, my ProAct Response 1 SEs, the current version of which retails for around £2,000. Now, I don't know what it is about my ProAct Response 1 SEs, but they typically tend to reveal shortcomings in amplifiers around this price range. In fact, I've got a reasonable understanding of what's going on. It's not the sensitivity. At 85 dB, it's low, but not unusually low for a compact bookshelf speaker, and it certainly isn't the minimum impedance. It dips down to 4.5 ohms, and modern amplifiers will handle that in their sleep. It's the fact that the impedance changes quite a bit across the frequency range, and that places quite a bit of demand on an amplifier and its power supply, and in particular its ability to deliver current. The Hagel H95 struggled to keep it under control, and it was a step too far for the Cyrus One Cast as well. The soundstage shrunk and it sounded muddy. Now, these are perfectly good amplifiers, but they're not really capable of revealing the fine textures and nuances in the mid-range that the ProActs are revered for. If you're looking for a one-box solution around £1,500, currently the Hagel H95 would be my first choice. It offers better all-round performance, has a bigger sound stage, and has a superior DAC. But the Cyrus One Cast isn't that far behind, and there are certain circumstances that I'd take the One Cast over the Hagel. For example, in a desktop scenario where I wanted the space that the amplifier took up kept to a minimum. The proximity that you're likely to have to the speakers in that scenario negates some of the disadvantages that the One Cast has, namely scale and dynamics. Sure, due to its tonal characteristic, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful with speaker matching than you would with the Hagel H95. That has a very even tonal characteristic and it will work with a wider range of speakers. But the One Cast is very much worthy of a recommended from this channel. Time for a touch of class. This episode's featured track is by Maria Kodami. It's a classical piece with just her on piano. It's a virtuoso performance, you'd expect nothing less from her. It's just her gently tickling the ivories to Beethoven's 14th piano sonata, and it's the Adejio piece that I've chosen. I'll put a link in the description notes. I hope you enjoy it. So that's it from me. All that remains for me to say is if you like this video, please hit that like button, please share it. If you like what I'm doing with this channel and you haven't subscribed already, please think about subscribing. It really does help to widen the reach of this channel and it's very much appreciated. And don't forget to hit that bell notification button so you know when new videos land. And for you, Mr. James, Picard out. Do I look like Patrick Stewart or something? Maybe with a suntan.